I was packing my portfolio for my dream tech internship. Mom snatched and tore it up, then dragged me across the floor by my hair. Your future. That's a joke. Their faces went pale when the evening light filtered through my bedroom window as I carefully arranged the printed wireframes and UI designs in my portfolio binder. Each page represented months of work, late nights, teaching myself Figma and Adobe XD, countless tutorials on YouTube when I should have been sleeping. Tomorrow would change everything. The internship at Cascade Technologies wasn't just any opportunity, it was the door I'd been pounding on since I discovered coding at 15. My hands trembled slightly as I slid the final mock-up into its protective sleeve. The app interface I designed for managing small business inventory had taken 3 months to perfect. Every pixel placement mattered. Every color choice served a purpose. What are you doing? Mom's voice cut through my concentration like a blade. I turned to find her standing in my doorway, arms crossed, that familiar expression of disgust twisting her features. She'd been drinking. I could tell by the slight sway in her posture, the glassiness in her eyes that appeared every evening around 7. Organizing my portfolio. The interview is tomorrow morning at 9:00. I kept my voice steady neutral. Never give her ammunition. Interview. She said the word like it tasted rotten. You're actually going through with this nonsense. My stomach tightened. We'd had this conversation a dozen times over the past 3 weeks, ever since I'd received the email from Cascade's HR department inviting me for a final round interview. Dad had been indifferent, as always, barely looking up from his phone. But Mom had launched into a tirade about wasted time and unrealistic expectations. It's not nonsense. Cascade is one of the top emerging tech companies in Seattle. They only select 15 interns nationwide. She moved into my room with that predatory stride I'd learned to recognize over my 18 years. You think you're special? You think some company is going to look at you and see anything worth investing in? I made it through 3 rounds of interviews. They wouldn't have called me back if they didn't see potential. The laugh that erupted from her throat was harsh and bitter. Potential. That's what your guidance counselor told me at your school conference sophomore year. Kelsey has such potential. What a load of garbage. You're average at best. Below average, probably, if we're being honest. I'd heard variations of this speech my entire life. The criticism was as familiar as my own heartbeat. But something had shifted in me over the past year. Maybe it was getting accepted to community college on a full scholarship. Maybe it was the praise I'd received from my programming professor who'd submitted my work to Cascade. Maybe I was just tired of shrinking myself to fit into the box Mom had built around me. I'm going to that interview. My voice came out stronger than I'd intended. Her eyes narrowed. In 3 steps, she crossed my room and snatched the portfolio binder from my desk. Before I could react, she was tearing pages free, ripping them in half, then quarters. Months of work destroyed in seconds. Stop! I lunged for the binder, but she shoved me hard enough that I stumbled backward. Your future? That's a joke. She continued shredding paper, littering my floor like confetti. You're not going anywhere. You're going to stay here, get a job at the grocery store like your cousin, and accept that you're nothing special. The final page tore apart in her hands. I stared at the destruction, my brain struggling to process what had just happened. Those designs, those wireframes, the case studies I'd written, explaining my design decisions, all of it scattered across my carpet in pieces. You're insane, I whispered. Her hand shot out and grabbed a fistful of my hair. The pain was immediate and shocking. She yanked me forward, bent down my knees, hitting the floor hard. I tried to pull away, but her grip only tightened nails, scraping against my scalp as she dragged me across the carpet toward the door. What did you say to me? She was shouting now, spit flying from her lips. You ungrateful little brat. After everything I've done for you, everything I've sacrificed. My hands clawed at hers, trying to loosen her grip, but she was stronger than me, always had been. The carpet burned against my knees, my legs as she hauled me like a disobedient dog. Dad appeared in the hallway, drink in hand, watching with the same blank expression he wore when watching television. Help me! I choked out tears streaming down my face. He took a sip of his whiskey and walked away. Mom finally released me at the top of the stairs. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the wall, my scalp throbbing. She stood over me, breathing hard, and for a terrifying moment I thought she might push me down the steps. You'll thank me one day, she said, her voice suddenly calm. When you're not wasting your time chasing impossible dreams. She disappeared into her bedroom. The door clicked shut. I sat there in the hallway, shaking, staring at the carpet fibers embedded in my palms. My portfolio was destroyed. The interview was in 14 hours. Everything I'd worked toward was evaporating. Then something hardened inside my chest, a resolve I didn't know I possessed. I went back to my room and locked the door. The torn pages mocked me from the floor, but I ignored them. My laptop sat on my desk, and more importantly, my external hard drive containing every file, every design, every line of code I'd written. The Cascade interview packet had included instructions for a digital portfolio submission. Most candidates brought physical copies, but digital was acceptable preferred even since it demonstrated technical competency. I spent the next 6 hours rebuilding everything. Not just scanning and reassembling, but improving, refining, adding interactive elements that the static pages couldn't convey. I created a personal website hosted on GitHub pages that showcased my work with hover effects and smooth transitions. Each project linked to detailed case studies. I embedded video walkthroughs explaining my design process. By 3:00 in the morning, I had something better than what I'd lost. I slept for 4 hours, then woke to silence. Mom and Dad were still sleeping off their respective intoxications. I dressed in the suit I'd bought from Goodwill and altered myself, made sure my hair covered the tender spots on my scalp, and slipped out the front door before anyone could stop me. The bus ride to downtown Seattle took 90 minutes. I reviewed my talking points on my phone, practiced my introduction, reminded myself that I deserved to be there. The Cascade Technologies office occupied 3 floors of a glass tower overlooking Puget Sound. The lobby alone was more impressive than anywhere I'd ever been. Clean lines, modern furniture, employees in casual clothes carrying laptops and coffee. Kelsey Thompson, the receptionist, smiled warmly. They're ready for you in conference room C. 3 people waited inside. Daniel Park, the head of UX design, Melissa Young, a senior product manager, and James Sullivan, who I recognized from his keynote speech at a tech conference I'd watched online. Thank you for coming in, Daniel said, gesturing to a chair. We've been impressed with your work throughout the process. Really creative problem solving in your design challenges. Thank you. I actually have something to show you. I pulled out my laptop, finger steady, despite my racing heart. I put together a digital portfolio last night. It provides a more comprehensive view of my process. I walked them through each project on my website, explaining my decisions, acknowledging weak points, discussing how I'd iterated based on user feedback. They asked probing questions. I answered honestly, admitting when I didn't know something rather than bluffing. Melissa leaned forward, studying a particularly complex user flow. This is sophisticated work. Most candidates at your level focus on aesthetics over functionality. You're thinking about the entire user journey. I believe design should solve problems, not just look appealing. James, who'd been quiet until then, spoke up. Your application mentioned you're entirely self-taught. No boot camp, no formal design program beyond a single college course. That's correct. I learned through documentation, online courses, and building projects. Lots of trial and error. My programming professor at community college saw some of the apps I built as side projects and encouraged me to apply to tech internships. He was the one who told me about Cascade's program. He nodded slowly. That demonstrates initiative and resilience. Those qualities matter more than pedigree in this field. He glanced at his colleagues, some unspoken communication passing between them. Kelsey, we'd like to offer you the internship position. Starting salary is $22 an hour, with potential to convert to full-time after 3 months, based on performance. The room tilted slightly. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. We discussed logistics. Start date in 2 weeks, 40 hours per week with some flexibility for college classes. Mentorship from senior designers. Real projects with real impact. I floated out of that building, my laptop bag lighter, despite containing my entire future. The bus ride home stretched endlessly. Reality set in gradually. I'd done it, despite everything, despite the sabotage, despite years of being told I wasn't capable. I'd secured the opportunity that would change my life's trajectory. But I still had to go back to that house. Mom was in the kitchen when I walked in, mid-afternoon light streaming through the windows. She looked up from her magazine, eyebrows raised. Back already. That was fast. They must have rejected you quickly. I set my bag down carefully on the counter. Actually, they offered me the position. Her expression flickered. Confusion. Then disbelief. What? The internship. I got it. 22 an hour. 40 hours a week. They said I was one of the strongest candidates they interviewed. Dad emerged from the living room, drink already in hand, despite it being barely 3:00. That's not possible, Mom said. Your portfolio was destroyed. I made sure of that. I rebuilt it. Better than before, actually. Took me most of the night, but I created a full digital showcase. They were really impressed. The color drained from her face. You're lying. I pulled out my phone, showed her the email that had come through during my bus ride. Official offer letter attached. Welcome packet. Instructions for onboarding. She grabbed the phone from my hand, staring at the screen as though she could make the words disappear through force of will. Dad looked over her shoulder, his expression shifting from indifference to something I couldn't quite read. This can't be real, Mom whispered. It's real. I start in 2 weeks. I'll be making enough to move out within a month, maybe 2, if I'm careful with expenses. Her head snapped up. Move out. You're not going anywhere. I'm 18. I can do whatever I want. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd only studied in books, and what I want is to leave this house and never look back. Dad set his glass down. Kelsey, let's not be hasty. Your mother was just trying to protect you from disappointment. By destroying my work, by dragging me across the floor, I pulled back my hair, revealing the tender spots on my scalp. This isn't protection. It's abuse. Mom's face cycled through emotions. Anger, denial, something that might have been fear. After everything we've done for you, fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head for 18 years. That's called basic parenting. That's the legal minimum. You don't get a medal for not letting me starve. How dare you speak to me that way? I'm telling the truth. Finally. My voice remained steady, each word deliberate. You spent my whole life trying to make me small, trying to convince me I was worthless so I wouldn't leave, wouldn't succeed, wouldn't prove you wrong. But I did prove you wrong, and I will keep proving you wrong. She moved toward me and I stepped back, maintaining distance. Don't. One word. Sharp and clear. Don't touch me again. Something in my tone stopped her. You need us, she said, but her voice wavered. I really don't. I went to my room and started pulling clothes from my closet, stuffing them into garbage bags, my laptop, my hard drives, my textbooks, everything essential. I called my friend Ashley and asked if I could crash on her couch for the next 2 weeks. She said yes before I finished explaining. Mom appeared in my doorway watching me pack. Dad hovered behind her, useless as ever. If you walk out that door, don't come back, she said. I paused and looked at her directly. That's the plan. You'll fail. You'll come crawling back, begging us to take you in. I won't fail. But even if I did, even if everything fell apart, I'd sleep on the street before I came back here. Her face contorted. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was believing for so long that you were right about me. I zipped up the last bag and slung my backpack over my shoulder. Ashley was already outside her car, idling at the curb. I'd texted her earlier and asked her to come during daylight hours when witnesses might be around if things got ugly. As I walked past my parents, Mom grabbed my arm. Not hard, not violent, but desperate. Kelsey, please. I looked at her hand, then at her face. For the first time in my life, I saw her clearly, not as the powerful authority figure who controlled my world, but as a deeply unhappy woman who'd tried to destroy my dreams because she'd given up on her own. Let go. She did. I walked out the front door, down the steps to Ashley's car, threw my bags in the back seat, and climbed into the passenger side. She pulled away from the curb without a word, understanding somehow that I needed silence. The 2 weeks before my internship started blurred together. Ashley's apartment was tiny, but warm, filled with the easy comfort of someone who actually wanted me there. I picked up a few shifts at a coffee shop to contribute to rent and food. Spent my free time preparing for Cascade, reviewing design principles, studying their existing products. My first day arrived bright and clear. Daniel met me in the lobby and introduced me to my mentor, a woman named Priya, who'd been with the company for 3 years. She showed me to my desk, my own desk with a brand new computer and 2 monitors. You're going to be working on the redesign of our client dashboard, Priya explained. It's a high-visibility project. Daniel specifically requested you for the team because of the inventory management system you designed. He loved your approach to complex data visualization. I sat down at my desk, logged into my computer with my employee credentials, and felt something fundamental shift in my universe. The weeks unfolded in a rhythm of challenging problems and late-night brainstorming sessions. My designs got critiqued, revised, implemented. I worked alongside people who treated me as a colleague, not a burden, who valued my input and pushed me to think deeper. My second week at Cascade, I encountered my first real challenge. The client dashboard redesign required integrating data from 7 different sources, each with its own formatting quirks and update frequencies. The existing system was a patchwork of Band-Aid solutions, functional but clunky, and users had been complaining for months about the learning curve. Priya dumped a folder of user interviews on my desk. Read through these. The pain points are everywhere, but try to identify patterns rather than just cataloging complaints. I spent 3 days immersed in those transcripts. Small business owners frustrated by the time it took to generate reports, finance managers who couldn't customize their views, operations directors who needed real-time data but were stuck refreshing manually every 15 minutes. The pattern emerged gradually. People didn't need more features. They needed better organization of what already existed and smarter automation of repetitive tasks. I sketched wireframes in my notebook during lunch breaks, scribbled ideas on sticky notes that covered my monitor's edges. Priya would swing by my desk, periodically glance at my progress, and offer a nudge here or there without directly solving problems for me. What if the dashboard could learn I proposed during a team meeting my third week? Like track which reports users generate most frequently and surface those options prominently, or detect patterns in when they need certain data and preload it. Daniel tilted his head, considering. That's machine learning territory. We'd need to loop in the engineering team to assess feasibility. I know it's ambitious, but even a basic version could significantly improve user experience. Just tracking frequency of use for different features and adjusting the interface accordingly. Marcus, one of the senior engineers, leaned back in his chair. Actually, we've got the infrastructure for that already. Built it for another project last year, but haven't leveraged it much. Could probably implement a basic adaptive system within a sprint or two. The meeting expanded from their engineers and designers riffing on possibilities. By the time we left the conference room, we'd outlined an approach that excited everyone involved. That evening, Ashley called while I was sketching refined mock-ups at her kitchen table. You sound different, she observed. Different how? Energized. Like you found where you're supposed to be. She wasn't wrong. Every day at Cascade felt like proof that I'd made the right choice, that walking out of my parents' house hadn't been reckless desperation, but calculated survival. The dashboard project consumed my 4th and 5th weeks. I collaborated with Marcus's engineering team, learning to think about design constraints from a technical perspective. What looked elegant on paper sometimes required absurd amounts of processing power. What seemed simple to implement sometimes broke fundamental assumptions in the code base. Design is compromise, Priya told me one afternoon when I was frustrated about having to simplify an interaction I'd envisioned. The art is making those compromises feel invisible to users. We launched the beta version of the redesigned dashboard to a small group of existing clients in week 6. The feedback came back overwhelmingly positive. Users immediately grasped the new information hierarchy. The adaptive learning system, even in its basic form, was cutting down navigation time significantly. Daniel forwarded me an email from one client who'd written, I don't know what you changed, but I just saved 20 minutes generating my weekly reports. This is exactly what we needed. Reading that message gave me a rush that was hard to describe. My work had tangible impact. Real people were benefiting from decisions I'd made, problems I'd solved. 6 weeks in, Daniel called me into his office. We'd like to offer you a full-time position after your internship ends, he said. You'd start as a junior UX designer. Salary of $70, 000 full benefits. Stock options, the works. $70,000. More money than I'd ever imagined making fresh out of high school. Yes, I managed. Absolutely yes. Daniel smiled, the kind of genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. You've earned it. The dashboard work was impressive, but more than that, you collaborate well. You listen to feedback without getting defensive. Those soft skills matter as much as design talent. We shook hands, and I floated back to my desk in a daze. Priya caught my expression and grinned knowingly. Congratulations. Welcome to the permanent team. How did you know? Daniel's been talking about converting you to full-time since week 3. You sealed the deal with the adaptive dashboard concept. The paperwork took a few days to process. HR scheduled meetings to discuss benefits, health insurance, dental vision retirement accounts with company matching. Concepts that had seemed impossibly adult suddenly became my reality. I signed the offer letter in HR's office, my hand steadier than I expected. The HR manager, a woman named Caroline with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, smiled as she filed the documents. Big moment, she said. Your first real job out of school. First real job ever, unless you count slinging coffee. Even more special then. We're glad to have you here, Kelsey. Walking out of that office official employee badge clipped to my shirt, I felt a shift in how I carried myself. This wasn't temporary anymore. This was my career, my path forward. That evening, I signed a lease on a studio apartment in Capitol Hill. Small, but mine. I bought furniture from IKEA, assembled it myself with Ashley's help. Hung curtains, stocked the fridge. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an older building with hardwood floors and tall windows. Not fancy, but clean and safe in a neighborhood where I could walk to coffee shops and grocery stores. My own space decorated according to my own preferences, without anyone criticizing my choices or destroying my belongings in fits of rage. Ashley helped me move in over a weekend. We hauled my few possessions up 3 flights of stairs, assembled my bed frame while arguing good-naturedly about whether the instructions made any sense, ordered pizza from the place down the block. "This is really happening," Ashley said, sitting cross-legged on my new couch, a second-hand find from Facebook Marketplace that was surprisingly comfortable. "You're actually doing it." "Doing what?" "Everything you said you would. Getting out, building a life. Most people just talk about escape. You actually executed." I looked around my apartment, taking inventory. Desk with my laptop, monitor mounted on an arm I'd installed myself, bookshelf filling up with design books and novels, kitchen stocked with food, bathroom with towels that matched. Small things, ordinary things, things that represented extraordinary freedom. "I had help," I said. "Your couch, your support." "I gave you a place to crash," she said. "You did everything else." The conversation shifted to lighter topics: Ashley's own job search, a guy she'd been seeing, plans for the upcoming weekend. Normal friend talk, the kind I'd rarely experienced growing up when every interaction at home had been tense or hostile. After she left, I stood in my apartment alone for the first time. The silence was different from the silence at my parents' house. Their quiet meant waiting for the next explosion, the next criticism, the next conflict. Here, silence felt peaceful, safe. I texted Daniel late Sunday night, starting to settle into the new place, ready to dive into whatever project comes next. He responded within minutes. "Glad to hear it. We've got something interesting brewing. More details Monday." Monday arrived with Seattle's typical gray drizzle. I grabbed coffee from the shop on my corner, a ritual I'd developed treating myself to a good latte before work, and caught the bus downtown. My commute was 40 minutes door to door, which I'd learned to use productively. I read design articles, sketched ideas, or just watched the city pass by the windows. The something interesting Daniel had mentioned turned out to be a pitch competition. Cascade was launching an internal innovation program where employees could propose new product features or entirely new products. 5 proposals would be selected for development with dedicated resources and the potential for the creators to lead the projects. "I want you to put something together," Daniel said during our one-on-one. "You've got instincts for user needs that even some of our senior people lack. Think about what problems you've observed. What gaps exist in our current offerings? How long do I have?" Proposals are due in 3 weeks. You'll present to the executive team if yours makes the short list. 3 weeks. I spent my evenings brainstorming, my weekends researching every spare moment, observing how people interacted with Cascade's existing products. The insight came while helping Ashley troubleshoot her freelance invoicing process. She was using 3 different tools, one for time tracking, another for generating invoices, a third for managing client communications. "Why isn't there something that does all of this together?" she complained. "I waste so much time switching between apps and manually entering the same information in multiple places." That was it. Freelancers and small creative agencies were underserved by existing project management tools, which were either too complex and expensive or too simplistic to handle the full workflow. Cascade could build something specifically for that market, combining time tracking, invoicing, project management, and client communication in one integrated platform. I dove into research with an intensity that surprised even me. I interviewed Ashley's freelancer friends, joined online communities for small business owners, analyzed competing products to identify their weaknesses. The proposal took shape over long nights at my kitchen table, fueled by coffee and determination. Priya reviewed my draft proposal 2 days before the deadline. She read through it carefully, occasionally nodding or making notes in the margins. "This is solid," she said finally. "Really solid. You've identified a genuine market gap and proposed a solution that leverages Cascade's existing strengths. The financial projections might be a bit optimistic, but the core concept is sound. You think it has a chance. I think it has a real shot at getting selected. Just tighten up the competitive analysis section and make sure your presentation focuses on the user pain points. Executives respond to stories about real people struggling with real problems." I submitted the proposal with an hour to spare before the deadline, then waited. The selection process would take 2 weeks, during which I tried to focus on my regular work and not obsess about the outcome. Regular work meant continuing refinements on the client dashboard, which had officially rolled out to all users and was generating consistently positive feedback. It also meant taking on smaller projects, redesigning email templates, optimizing the mobile app's navigation, creating a style guide for the marketing team. Each project taught me something new. The email templates forced me to think about design constraints in different clients. What looked great in Gmail might break in Outlook. The mobile optimization required ruthless prioritization of features, since screen real estate was so limited. The style guide demanded clarity in articulating design decisions so non-designers could implement them consistently. Daniel pulled me into more meetings, exposing me to different aspects of the business. I sat in on user research sessions, observing how the team conducted interviews and usability tests. I joined strategy discussions about product roadmaps and future prioritization. I even attended a few sales calls, learning how the sales team positioned Cascade's products and what objections potential clients raised. "You're investing a lot of time in training me," I observed to Daniel after a particularly long strategy meeting. "That's intentional," he said. "You've got potential beyond just executing designs. I want you thinking strategically about why we build what we build, not just how to build it." The comment stuck with me. Growing up, I'd internalized the message that I should stay in my lane, not ask too many questions, be grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity came my way. Here I was being actively encouraged to expand my thinking to consider bigger pictures. 2 weeks after submitting my proposal, Daniel found me at my desk. "Executive presentations are tomorrow at 2:00, he said. "Your pitch made the final 5. Congratulations." My stomach dropped. "Tomorrow you'll have 15 minutes to present, followed by 10 minutes of Conda. Conference room B. Dress business casual. And Kelsey," he paused, "don't overthink it. You know this material inside and out. Just tell them why it matters." I barely slept that night, running through my presentation, repeatedly anticipating questions, refining my talking points. The next morning crawled by in slow motion, every minute stretching interminably. At 1:45, I gathered my laptop and notes and headed to conference room B. 4 other presenters waited outside, all significantly older than me, all looking nervous despite their experience. The presentations ran long. By the time my turn came, it was nearly 4:00, and the executives looked tired. James Sullivan sat at the head of the table, flanked by the CFO, the Chief Product Officer, and 2 VPs I'd seen around but never met. I connected my laptop to the projector, pulled up my slides, and started talking. Not talking like I was explaining the idea to Ashley over coffee, making the case for why this problem mattered, and why Cascade was positioned to solve it. I walked through user stories. Ashley's frustration, the small design agency owner I'd interviewed who spent 5 hours a week just on administrative tasks, the freelance developer who'd lost a client because an invoice got lost in email. The executives started asking questions before I'd finished, which Priya had warned me was a good sign. It meant they were engaged, thinking critically about implementation. "What's your estimated development timeline?" the CPO asked. "Based on conversations with engineering, a minimum viable product could launch in 4 to 5 months. Full feature set within a year if we validate demand." How? 53 interviews with freelancers and small agency owners. 47 of them said they'd switch to a tool like this if it existed at the right price point. I've got detailed notes and recordings available if you want to review the research. James leaned forward. "What would you do differently if we gave you twice the budget but half the timeline?" I thought for a moment. I'd focused the initial release on time tracking and invoicing the 2 features that showed the strongest demand in interviews. Save project management and client communication for version 2. Launch faster with less, then iterate based on actual usage data. More questions followed, drilling into details, stress testing assumptions. I answered as honestly as I could, admitting uncertainty when appropriate rather than bluffing. After 25 minutes, James called time. "Thank you, Kelsey. We'll have decisions finalized by the end of the week." I walked back to my desk in a fog, adrenaline crash hitting hard. Priya intercepted me at the elevator. "How'd it go?" "I have no idea. They asked a lot of questions." "That's great. When they're not interested, they just nod politely and say thank you. Questions mean they're seriously considering it." Friday afternoon, Daniel called an all-hands meeting. The entire company gathered in the main common area, maybe 150 people. James took the stage to announce the 5 selected projects. Mine was third. Kelsey Thompson's proposal for an integrated platform serving freelancers and small creative agencies addresses a significant market opportunity we've been overlooking, James said. We'll be allocating a dedicated development team and budget to bring this to market over the next year, with Kelsey serving as product lead. Product lead. I had just turned 19 the week before and was barely 3 months into my first real job. I'd be leading the development of an entirely new product. The rest of the meeting blurred together. Colleagues congratulated me afterward. People I barely knew shook my hand or clapped me on the shoulder. Daniel found me afterward grinning widely. "This is huge, Kelsey. Youngest product lead in company history. Don't let it go to your head, but also don't undersell what you've accomplished." Nearly 3 months after walking out of my parents' house, I'd built a life they'd insisted was impossible. That evening, I signed a lease on a studio apartment in Capitol Hill. Small, but mine. I bought furniture from IKEA, assembled it myself with Ashley's help, hung curtains, stocked the fridge. 3 months after walking out of my parents' house, I'd built a life they'd insisted was impossible. My phone buzzed occasionally with messages from Mom. They started angry, then turned pleading, then angry again. I blocked her number after the 15th voicemail about how I'd ruined the family, how I was selfish, how I owed them gratitude. I owed them nothing. Ashley helped me change my phone number, update my address with the college create boundaries I should have established years earlier. One afternoon, about 5 months into my position at Cascade, I was grabbing coffee near the office when I spotted Mom across the street. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. She saw me, started to cross toward me, and I simply turned and walked the other direction. She called my name. I kept walking. The work at Cascade expanded my skills rapidly. I took on more complex projects, led small teams, presented to executives. Priya became not just a mentor, but a friend, someone who understood the strange journey I'd taken to get there. "You know what's remarkable about you?" she said one day over lunch. "You don't carry bitterness. Most people who've been through what you described would be angry all the time." I was angry, I admitted, but anger takes energy, and I'd rather spend that energy building something. 8 months after my internship started, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "From your father." I almost deleted it without reading. Almost. But curiosity won. The message was short. Dad explained that he and Mom were divorcing, that he'd finally admitted to himself that staying was destroying what little remained of his own life. He didn't apologize for his passivity, didn't ask for forgiveness, just stated facts, and included his new phone number if I ever wanted to talk. I sat with that email for 3 days before responding. Eventually, I sent back a brief message acknowledging receipt, nothing more. Maybe someday I'd be ready for more conversation. But that day hadn't arrived yet. A year after the interview that changed everything, Cascade sent me to a design conference in San Francisco. I was presenting a case study on accessible design patterns we'd implemented in our products. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of designers, I thought about the girl who'd been dragged across the floor for daring to dream. She felt like someone from another lifetime. During the Conda session, someone asked how I'd developed such strong problem-solving skills. I learned that obstacles are just constraints, I said, and constraints force creativity. When something gets destroyed, you can rebuild it stronger. When someone tells you something is impossible, you can prove them wrong through action, not argument. The audience applauded. After my session, several people approached with job offers, opportunities, invitations to collaborate. That evening, I video called Ashley from my hotel room. She'd moved across the country for her own career, but we talked regularly. "How'd the presentation go?" she asked. "Better than I could have imagined." "I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" "I do, and thank you for that couch, for giving me a safe place when I needed it most." That's what friends do. After we hung up, I stood at my hotel window, watching fog roll across the Bay Bridge. My reflection stared back at me, and I barely recognized the person I'd become. Confident, capable, free. Mom had been right about one thing. My future had been a joke in that house, but only because she'd written the punchline. Once I took the pen from her hand and wrote my own story, the joke transformed into something else entirely. Success, achievement, proof. I never did go back to that house, never felt the pull to reconnect, to give them a chance to be part of what I built. Some people earn their place in your life through love and support. Others forfeit that privilege through cruelty and destruction. 2 years after leaving, I was promoted to senior UX designer. 3 years after I was leading the design team for Cascade's flagship product. 4 years after I bought a house in West Seattle with a view of the water. Every milestone felt like another piece of evidence in the case I'd been building since that destroyed portfolio that I was exactly as capable as I'd always known myself to be. The scars on my scalp faded eventually, hidden beneath hair that grew back healthier than before, but I never forgot what they represented. The physical manifestation of someone trying to pull me down, to keep me trapped in their small, bitter world. I had escaped, not just physically, but completely. And in doing so, I discovered something Mom had never learned, that the best revenge isn't cruelty or vindication. It's simply living well, despite every attempt to prevent you from doing so. It's building a life so full and bright that the darkness you left behind can't touch you anymore. It's waking up every morning knowing that you proved them wrong just by existing, by thriving, by refusing to accept their version of who you were supposed to be. That's what their pale faces couldn't comprehend when I walked out with my garbage bags and my laptop. That destroying my portfolio had destroyed nothing that mattered. Because the real work, the actual foundation of my future, existed in my mind, in my skills, in my unwillingness to quit. They could tear up paper, but they couldn't tear up my potential. And in the end, that made all the difference.